Hello friends, welcome to EPG Pathshala. Today we are going to discuss the module titled New Issues in Agrarian Studies. I am Dr. Anurekhachari Wagh, Assistant Professor at the Department of Sociology, Savitribai Phule, Pune University. This module is part of the larger paper titled Agrarian Relations and Social Structure in India. This paper is coordinated by Dr. Manish Thakur of IIM Kolkata. What would this module titled New Issues in Agrarian Studies focus on? It focuses on structural changes that has come across various sectors including primary, secondary and tertiary, and what kind of effects it has on the economy and also on the peasants within the Indian structure. Further, this module will also focus on agricultural sector, how it has been impacted through contract farming. Further, it will also look into how there is an increased transfer of land from agriculture to non-agriculture kind of industries, and what does this have impacted on the agrarian structure is also something that agrarian studies could really engage with. New issues in agrarian studies. In India, the agricultural sector contributed substantially to the total gross domestic product (GDP) at the time of the independence. The village economy and the emblematic Kisan were celebrated in the larger national culture. But by the turn of the century, the sheen of agriculture sector appears to be lost. India has become a service-driven economy. But this structural change in the character of the economy is not accompanied by a structural change in the employment. Agriculture continues to employ 53% of the workforce while contributing only 14% of the total GDP. This has resulted in a decline in productivity of agriculture in even agriculturally rich states like Punjab. This scenario is referred to as a crisis in agriculture on many occasions. This crisis has to be understood in the context of the larger development strategy adopted by India. The political ideology, planning processes and the economic policies have determined the multiple trajectories of agrarian change in India. There have been changes within and across the major sectors in the economy. These changes, which led to the marginalization of agriculture, were also accompanied by a decline of the farmers' movement. In spite of the political influence of the rural elite and the limited migration from rural to urban India, agriculture was going through a downfall. This is perhaps due to the growing differentiation of the agrarian elite and the disintegration of the village as a viable socio-economic unit. The disintegration of a village as a structural unit was because of the introduction of new modes of cultivation. These new modes of cultivation required a different kind of social organization of production, and the traditional ties characterizing the local communities began to crumble. The growing politicization of Dalits at the same time distanced them from the local community. The new forms of commercial and capitalist agriculture that the rich farmers engaged in led to the breakdown of the traditional Jajmani system. With the decline of agriculture, the transfer of land for non-agricultural usage began to be carried on at an increasing rate. It has been observed that the average size of land holdings in India has diminished in India from 2.28 hectares in 1970-71 to 1.23 hectares in 2005-2006. The proportion of marginal holdings, that is area less than 1 hectare, has increased and is now around 64.8%. These small farmers have lagged behind in the agricultural sector as the benefits of new modes of cultivation are reaped only by the big farmers. This group of population, along with rural landless people, are at a loss as they do not have the skills to get employed in industries. Industrialization has received impetus from the government ever since independence. For meeting the requirement of land for building industries, special economic zones, SEZs and other infrastructural projects, the transfer of agricultural land for non-agricultural usage is inevitable. The state has the power of eminent domain which enables it to acquire land for public purpose. This requires acquisition of land by private players also for the purpose of industrial development or infrastructural development. The new Act, Right to Fair Compensation and Transparency in Land Acquisition, Rehabilitation and Resettlement Act 2013 provides for clear guidelines and requirements for land transfer to private companies. In the given socio-economic environment and legal framework, this module will examine the structural changes across the primary, secondary and tertiary sector in the economy and its effect on the peasant class. It begins with describing the development path adopted by India after independence. Further, it discusses about the changes brought about within the agriculture sector through contract farming and its contribution to the socio-economic development of peasants. To understand the changes beyond agricultural sector, the effect of transfer of land from agriculture to non-agriculture sector are also examined. It concludes by raising questions about the general position of the peasants in the highly unequal society of our times. The development agenda. The development of a capitalist economic system in a country is necessarily accompanied by a transformation of its social structure. Partha Chatterjee explains the conceptual framework given by Sanyal for the development of capitalism in India and refers to the developmental model adopted in India after independence as a process of passive revolution. This is because, in spite of claiming to be inclined to socialism, planning had pursued modernization through industrialization. The political arena was dominated by the elites, and unlike what happens in a revolution, the dominant class was not overthrown. Land reforms and initiatives for agrarian development over the years have largely failed. The development process hence did not qualify as a real revolution. However, the establishment of democracy indeed provided an avenue for popular expression of varied interests. The uniqueness of the Indian capitalist process lies in the fact that the primitive accumulation of capital and welfare measures by the state as a part of passive revolution was carried out simultaneously. Primitive accumulation through separation of producers from the means of production was carried on along with the provisions by the government agencies to provide them with basic welfare needs of livelihood. The passive revolution of capital helped secure hegemony of the elites along with rudimentary appeasement of the poor masses. This was also required because in India, larger conditions under which capitalism was getting established was different from those prevalent in the West. Europe could deal with the surplus labor created by land disposition by resettling them in colonies. The capitalist growth then was also far less capital intensive, which resulted in the creation of jobs for the dispossessed people. Such has not been the context in which capitalism took shape in India. Therefore, the conditions of poverty and inequality in India got exacerbated. The welfare measures of the state were like drops in the ocean. Not surprisingly, in recent times there have been growing incidences of farmer mobilization not only against the continued misery but also against the dispossession by the state and capital. There are numerous people's movements comprising of anti-cess struggles, movement against displacement and rights over common property resources. It is well established that as a large section of Indian workforce is trapped in agriculture for lack of alternative opportunities. They are in a low productivity sphere which leads to extremely low income and consumption expenditure. The social implication of such an economic condition is a rising unrest among peasant classes. With the advent of paradigms of human rights and justice, putting down peasant resistance by armed power of the state is no longer legitimate. The state therefore takes on several measures to reverse the effect of primitive accumulation of capital. These initiatives of the government to reverse the ruthless effects of capitalism in current times involve intervention of the market. The peasant and craft production is totally integrated into the market economy. Within agriculture sector, the new mechanism adopted with the intent of bringing prosperity to farmers is contract farming. The entire process involves large business houses, and it seems to be a path-breaking idea to link farmers to business and larger markets. Similarly, building large industries is considered as another option in the market economy to create employment for a large number of people. These large industries would create avenues for the development of the real estate, banking services, and the retail market. In the current globalized market economy, these are the ideas available. For careful understanding of these processes would reveal a different picture altogether. The economy has turned to be pro-business rather than become a pro-market one. A market economy would have created a level playing field and regional inequalities would have diminished. But available evidence confirms the view that development model pursued in India post-1980s was pro-business, resting on the ruling alliance of political and economic elites. Also, the agrarian transition has been unique with limited influence of capitalism in the agriculture sector. We need to consider some of these issues such as contract farming, setting up of large industries, and real estate growth in greater detail. Structural compulsions. The new economic environment has led to reorganization and restructuring of the agricultural sector. The macro level policy changes in the direction of free market capitalism have impacted on agriculture. Agribusiness growth, which is defined as a process of industrialization of agriculture and rural production, takes place through either appropriationism or substitutionism. Both these processes are contradictory to each other, as the former is centered on exploitation of land and other biological resources through advanced technology to get cheaper material, and the latter focus on moving industry away from direct crop sources to create new products. Contract farming is a method of appropriationism through which biological resources are utilized to the optimum level to get enhanced level of output. It has been promoted by the World Bank and was introduced in India to ensure quality and timely availability of raw materials for the food processing industry. Contract farming was also left as the only way for involvement of large farms in agriculture, as captive farming is not allowed in India. Bringing the farmers and large farms together in effect leads to changes at three levels: production, processing and marketing. One of the models comprising of the different stakeholders involved in the contract farming is shown in figure 1. It basically comprises of four elements: a pre-agreed price, quality, quantity or acreage, minimum and maximum, and time. It can also be seen as a method of vertical integration where the different levels of supply chain are merged. However, whether integration takes place or not depends on the nature of the contract, which is mainly of three types: procurement contracts, partial contracts and total contracts. It is only in the total contract that perfect vertical integration takes place, as all the inputs are provided by the large farm and produce is brought at a pre-agreed price. The reasons for contract farming can be seen from both demand and supply side. Supply side forces were fueled by a growing application of agricultural technology leading to production to specification and preservation technology, while demand was fueled by rising income and increasing number of discriminating consumers. Contract farming as a concept can also be viewed as creating positive externalities which lead to institutional change at a wider level. The political economy viewpoint of this arrangement would, however, bring out that fact that contract farming leads to a diminishing role of the state in the agricultural sector and an increased focus on specialization, which would lead to an increasing shift to production of cash crops. In the long run, it would lead to capitalist penetration in agriculture and indirectly give the agribusiness a control on land. Such an approach rejects the various economic rationales for engaging in contract farming and brings out the influence of cultural and social relations of production in the arrangement of contract farming. There have been studies to prove that contracting has helped them generate better employment and acquire new skills for farming. However, farmers find these contracts biased and enforced strictly in case of default by the farmers due to the natural calamity loss. The large farms do not explain the pricing system, overprice their services and delay payments. This is explained as monopolistic exploitation, a system in the economy where one buyer is present, in contract farming by Shiva Ramakrishnan and Jyotishi. This leads to power asymmetry between producer and the buyer, resulting into exploitation of the farmer. Only an economic view of the process of contract farming would not help it understand it as a social phenomenon. The culture of village system influences the working and outcomes of the contract. It is due to cultural factors that the arrangement of contract farming becomes biased against producers, as they do not have the negotiating ability to get a fair share of the profit generated by the large farm from the produce. Also in India, there are several instances when the contracts are not written but oral in nature with loose specifications. It protects the large farms from all kinds of unforeseen obligations but makes sure that the farmers meet the contract provisions under all circumstances. The larger social impact of contract farming is also not favorable. Though contract farming has brought an employment boom and an increase in wage rate at the local level, this would not last for long, as companies plan to mechanize plantation and harvesting operations. The effect on the surrounding non-contract farmers can be detrimental as well. The shift to cash crop from basic food crops by large farmers due to contract farming can result in a price hike of the basic food crop. The poor farmers would not be experiencing the increase in income due to contract farming, but their expenses would increase. Such favoritism towards large farmers would result in a socially undesirable dual agricultural model. For the large farmers, there is an entire process of quality assessment and advance payment before entering into the contract. On the other hand, there is no such arrangement for small farmers. The farms have this discretion, especially in the procurement contracts, to reject The produce based in low quality and on many occasions favor large farmers who can bear the cost of investing in better inputs. The socio-economic divide existing in the rural agrarian system would further deepen due to the contract farming. Irrespective of the disadvantages that the system of contract farming can pose for the small and marginal farmers, it was introduced in India in the state of Punjab in the 1990s. The Zoll Committee report in 1986 on diversification of Punjab agriculture suggested more land to be brought under cultivation of fruits and vegetables. It was suggested that the economic conditions of small and marginal farmers would not improve without a change in the crop pattern and for the diversification in terms of technology used. In Punjab, the system was established by the entry of Pepsi Foods into potato and chili processing, which was later taken over by HLL. Both these are export-oriented companies which also led to internationalization of farming sector in Punjab. But most of these farmers were rich owing to large tracts of land and capital to invest in better agricultural inputs. Also, the area cultivated for fruit and vegetable remained less than 2% till late 1990s. There could be only shift in the area within fruit and vegetable sector. The number of farmers suicide in 1998 and 1999 in Punjab only validates that this arrangement has not improved the socio-economic conditions of small farmers. The Punjab government launched a multi-crop, multi-year contract farming scheme in 2002 and the Punjab Agro Food Grains Corporation was established as a nodal agency for the same purpose. This agency provided farmers with high-yielding variety of seeds from reputed companies, technical supervision and buybacks of the entire produce of the farmers to tie-ups with large firms. The plan was to bring 2.5 million acres of rice wheat area under alternative crops in 2007, which did not happen. Marginal farmers, that is farmers with marginal holding between 0.01 to 2.50 acres, hardly figure in the scheme. Similar is the case in Andhra Pradesh, where oil palm cultivation was encouraged through contract farming with the express objective of helping the small farmers. On the contrary, small farmers found the production of agaric more profitable as it was more labor intensive and the farmers could avail of the subsidized irrigation facilities. In fact, ensuring participation of small farmers in contract farming is not an automatic and requires strong regulatory framework. The role of NGOs or farmers' cooperatives has also been limited in Punjab. They potentially have a major role to play in terms of information dissemination, monitoring and security of contract. In Punjab, Agriculture Produce Market Committee Act has been amendment to recognize contract farming as a system. However, the Act does not provide legal protection to growers in case of a default by the private firm. A broader institutional support system is required if the ill effects of contract farming has to be eliminated and interest of small farmers is to be protected. A regulatory framework to protect the interest of the farmers is urgently required. The state can also provide for certain concessions and need to attract large number of firms in the area of fruits and vegetables processing. Also, the rules binding on the agribusiness firms to compulsorily involve marginal and small farmers can be formulated and incentive for the same can be designed. State should function as the facilitator in a manner that the interest of small and marginal farmer is met. Shiva Ramakrishnan and Jyotishi suggest the formation of an association of farmers is a solution proposed to eliminate the monopolistic exploitation of contract farming. These measures would ensure that the new concept that was launched to infuse life back in the agrarian system of the rural would become inclusive in nature rather than further deepening the socio-economic disparity in the villages, dispossessing the poor. In recent years, land grab has become a catchphrase which refers to increasing transnational land transactions for large-scale production of food as well as for non-agricultural purposes. Here we focus on internal land grabbing concerning non-agricultural purposes including mining, industrial and infrastructural development, business parks, residential and other real estates. During 2007 and 11, the area of cultivable land has shrunk by 7,90,000 hectares mainly due to the diversion of land towards non-agricultural purposes like construction industries and other development activities. A government committee on land reforms asserts that growing corporate investment in indigenous areas is the biggest land grabs of tribal land since Columbus. The extent of landlessness in India has increased. The proportion of effectively landless people or those owning less than 1 acre of land among rural households stands at 73%. The NSSO data reveals a lower figure. This discrepancy is largely due to the range of land holding within which landlessness is considered. For the purpose of this module, we assume that all farmers with less than 1 acre of land as landless because it has been seen that such farmers use 90% of the land holding for homestead are in no position to generate livelihood from land. The development of special economic zones (SEZs) has been a major factor behind landlessness of peasants. It has led to land wars in India with farmers resisting the transfer of the land to the capitalist. According to Levian, what is going on is accumulation by dispossession. The agrarian transformation in India is increasingly tied up with capitalist growth. This transformation is non-labor absorbing and the real estate driven and is therefore responsible for further marginalization of the poor. In recent past, there have been incidents of intense farmer protest in Nandigram, West Bengal and in several other places in Mumbai, Gurgaon, Rajasthan. These conflicts have come in the way of industrial projects of large companies like POSCO, Reliance and Tata. In India, however, acquisition of land for the development of industrial estates and townships is not a recent phenomenon. It has been going on for quite some time. Immediately after independence, the transfer of land was seen as a sacrifice for the development of the nation. Of late, the nature of land transfers has changed. The acquisition of land is currently for the corporate sector and for the SEZ. This is indicative of a new phase of primitive accumulation. Land is now more used for real estate development and as investment rather than for manufacturing activities which would create jobs. This has contributed to increasing the informal sector, which now comprises of 95% of the labor force. In fact, the creation of jobs has been low in the economy in the last 2 decades. This means that the high growth experienced so far is based on increase in labor productivity. This is evident from the large-scale layoff of workers in private sector manufacturing companies like Tata Steel and Tata Motors at a time when there are enormous increase in production. The public sector employment also fell substantially over the last 2 decades, which kept overall employment growth at 1% at a time when the economy was soaring at 7 to 8%. The improvement in productivity, however, did not lead to increase in wages, which basically meant a substantial increase in profit. To further encourage these processes and push the labor force to deplorable work conditions, SEZs were established. It has been found out that workers in SEZs work for 5.3% more hours than those in non-SEZs and at early wages, which is 35% lower. This is possible because SEZs are declared as public utility services, which exempts them from labor laws like Minimum Wages Act and Contract Labor Regulation and Abolition Act. Worker strikes are also made illegal in SEZs. In India, SEZs have been developed under inspiration from the Chinese SEZs but are different in the nature of its ownership. In India, unlike China, these are developed by private companies, which in a way lead to privatization of development. The state attracts private companies to build hyper-liberalized economic enclaves with minimum taxes, tariffs, regulations, which give a lot of operational freedom to private sector. The SEZ Act of 2005 requires only 50% of the land to be used for productive purpose, and the remainder is to be used as per the wishes of the private developer. The 50% of the land meant for productive use is mostly used for housing development and associated social infrastructure like shopping complexes, private schools, golf courses. Therefore, in the name of privatized infrastructure, development has created several avenues for real estate gains. As per the Government of India data on the SEZ of May 2008, only 5% of the approved SEZs are multi-product. Information technology, IT information technology enabled services, SEZs comprise 62% of the total SEZ project. The employment at the IT and ITES SEZs will create is negligible. Sector only accounts for 0.3% of the country's employment and revenue is majorly from export. In effect, SEZs turn out to be a form of predatory accumulation of wealth by private players through dispossession of subsistence farmers from their land. Even otherwise in India, the land holding is fragmented in nature and the small holding peasantry is reluctant to sell their land for numerous reasons. Even when the farmers would like to exit agriculture, they are not ready to surrender the land as it is valued in ways which are not easily reducible to exchangeable value. It is for this reason that the private companies are reluctant to exchange in direct land transactions with the farmers and prefer the state's involvement as a facilitator for the land transfer. Large projects are therefore given land through the eminent domain provision of the state, which allows the state to acquire land for public purpose. SEZs thus have become a legitimate mechanism for unrestricted private capital accumulation in which the state acts as a broker. As a consequence, land is made artificially cheap. The land transactions are not governed by the market forces and hence the small landowners are at a relative economic disadvantage. The value of agricultural land is also underestimated as it is based on average listed sales prices of previous years, which are lesser than the real purchase price. In the case of Mahindra World City in Rajasthan, even though ownership of land is with the state government, the company has a 99 years lease and 40% of the land is developed as lifestyle zone. The real estate development in Gurgaon has also negatively impacted the agrarian structure in the vicinity. Several commercial farmers, in fact, have been reduced to subsistence level farmers due to grabbing of the land. These peri-urban residents have been pushed into other livelihood activities such as working in brick lanes or nearby shops. In several cases, the effect of receiving cash in lieu of land has led to increase in idleness and alcoholism. The impact of dispossession of the farmers from the land is far-reaching in its implications. It brings distortions to the agrarian structure and transforms the lives of the farmers in fundamental ways. The SEZ developer in a state-appointed capitalist landlord which has made the state a key player in the entire process of dispossession. Despite the resistance on several instances at multiple levels, the states have not yet made any serious policy intervention on this count. After the SEZ Act was passed in 2005, by 2006, 464 SEZs were approved, which has increased to almost 600 in the recent years. The details are shown in picture 2. The approved SEZs would require over half of the million acres of land. Given the present agitations on the issue, the transfer of land is not going to be smooth. In states like Goa and West Bengal, the establishment of SEZ has already been put on hold in the context of opposition to them. In Goa, 7 SEZ had got final approval by 2007, which was opposed by civil society. It was perceived as a land and resource, mainly water grab for the real estate sector and industry. People were against the arbitrary and illegal handing over the local resources for private profit. In Goa, however, the central issue was not merely land possession but also environment hazards that SEZs would bring forth. It was seen as impacting the livelihood relationship between man and nature. The activists demanded locally appropriate projects would require reconstitution from below of the relationship between land and resources. In West Bengal and Medinapur, people have been waiting for years for the utilization of land after it had been transferred for the industrial projects. They have neither received compensation nor are able to cultivate their land. The entire process of land acquisition finally becomes faulty due to absence of any arrangement for rehabilitation of the dispossessed, which raises the question of compensation to both small peasants and agricultural laborers in the process of land acquisition in West Bengal. Till now, the acquisition of land was carried out under the colonial law, namely Land Acquisition Act of 1894, which does not have any provision for rehabilitation. Section 3 of the Land Acquisition Act 1894 poses lot of problems. It attempts to define public purpose but its loose language creates an opportunity for companies to project their ventures as an initiative to serve public purpose. The requirements for acquisitions with a private purpose under Section 40 would no longer be binding in an acquisition for a public purpose. Such an acquisition can be done by private companies as a special economic zone under Section 3F3 for development purposes. Compensation under the LAA would be decided subjectively by the collector, and the process of finalizing the value of compensation cannot be questioned. The displacement and rehabilitation issue and the overall compensation therefore become central issues for the new Land Acquisition Act. The Section 2 of the new Act, Right to Fair Compensation and Transparency in Land Acquisition, Rehabilitation and Resettlement Act 2003 clearly lays down the various reasons for which the government can acquire land. The new legal framework is thought to be a positive movement and is seen as having addressed some of the recurrent concerns, yet it is too early to comment on its progressive features. Friends, from this module we could understand in terms of summary 4 important areas. What has happened now that we have discussed is development policies has not benefited the large number of poor or marginalized in India, which has led to increased inequality. Secondly, we have also seen that in India what we are facing now is jobless growth, and within that the agrarian sector features in a large way. Thirdly, we have also looked into how poor Indians are dealing with complex livelihoods and very vulnerable livelihoods. And lastly, we have seen there is a great growth of informal sector in which large number of distressed rural poor are increasingly becoming part of this big informal sector. Thank you.